Welcome to Fossilwood. This is my first park series. I'm extremely excited to embark upon this journey with you all. There is so much that I want to experiment with and accomplish. As I am creating this, I hope to try things that I've always wanted to do within the previous games. We are building on the Temperate Square map. I'll be focusing my efforts today on the main plaza, the first main exhibit, as well as the surrounding viewing areas. Now let's begin. Any good park needs a solid foundation, and that's where I begin. I first start off by painting the layout of my entrance and shaping the Titanosaur exhibit. I needed to raise the viewing area so I could have the backdrop that I desired for the entrance of the park. I am the type to build a little bit of everything at the beginning, because I need to be able to see what I'm envisioning and if it will work or not. My plan is to build a path that wraps around the side of the exhibit that leads to the upper main viewing area. Next, I began to lay out the path just to get an idea of what I wanted for the upper viewing area. I did end up changing it though because it was just a little too large for what I wanted. The next major step was to cover up the ugly terrain with rocks. This is always one of my favorite parts because I can really fully envision what the area will end up looking like. One of my favorite parts of this game is just building terrain. I love the way a backdrop can change within just a few seconds just by placing a few large rocks and a couple of trees. I use rocks to divide areas as well. This can be very important for areas of a park because if you end up not dividing stuff enough, it can just all look the same, which is something that I'm not a big fan of. And here I finally start to work on the centerpiece of the main plaza, which is a little cherry blossom area. One thing I really wanted in the center of this was a little bit of water, but the brush is limiting and I couldn't actually do that, so I had to improvise. And I chose to improvise by using a piece of a fountain, which is one of the only pieces you can place that has water. Come on, Frontier, give us like a block of water that you could place because that would be so useful for doing stuff like this, rather than this little shallow gravel-filled rectangle. And just like that, in my crazy fashion, I'm back over at the Titanosaur exhibit, placing water and foliage and more rocks, because why not? One thing that I wanted to make sure about was that the entire enclosure wasn't absorbed entirely by rocks, foliage, and other things, because the Titanosaurs are kind of large and their tails are even longer, and they'll just clip through everything and kind of break the immersion and how beautiful they are. So I ended up not really doing a whole lot inside of the area itself, but more everything around it that made the area feel more interesting, at least personally for me. And oh wow, I'm back at the plaza again. I wanted to fill in this little area with something. Originally, I was thinking maybe I could put like the Aqualops or the Microceratus in here, but it just felt a little too out of place to do that. So I decided to just put a little pond, but again, the water brush just wasn't working the way I wanted it to, so I decided I'll just do what I did again in the little cherry blossom centerpiece. Next, I placed a little kiosk I made a while back. I wanted to place this in the middle just because it was a little empty and I needed something that gave some height and that made the area feel like it all came together. And I think that did it. And then I followed by placing my large food amenity that I'm also very proud of. And it really pulled everything together, I feel. Here is where I see a gap and I genuinely had no idea what to put here, so I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna put a hyperloop because the guests are just gonna complain about there not being enough transport, and I also just want a hyperloop that I can reuse for things like this. So I spent probably a good 40 minutes doing that. I'm gonna jump through that here, but I think it looks nice in the end. It matches all the other buildings, and yes, I did put a trim on the bottom. I did forget to do that, and then I looked at it again and I said, I'm missing something. I was missing the bottom trim. And then for about the next 20 minutes, I worked on the zip line, which I'm pretty happy with. It isn't the most intricate thing, but I think it fits. One of the most difficult challenges I ran into with this area was working on this little hill. I didn't know exactly what I wanted, but I knew that I wanted some sort of viewing platform or gallery. And the viewing platform was just a little too tall and I didn't like the way it would stick out otherwise, so I decided to embed a viewing gallery in the side of the cliff. I think this was a really innovative way of hiding it, but still allowing the guests to view the animals from down below. Something that I felt that I had to accomplish with this viewing gallery was make it look seamless and like there was a staircase coming down from the top or some sort of tunnel. I think I executed that fairly well with this double hyperloop, and I'm excited with the way it turned out because it turned out fairly seamless and it's really only just looks like a glass wall inside of the cliff. Even though I never really was going to go into here, I still wanted to put a light on the inside just so I could at least play around with it. And this is the least decorated part of this park, but it's not really going to matter because we're never going to see it. But I felt that it is worth mentioning. I still did put the effort of putting at least a light and some doors in. Then I went back outside to adjust the rocks that I had moved to put the viewing gallery in place. I spent a lot of extra time to make sure that the rocks looked natural and that it was all seamless. Once I got to the top here, I kind of just went with the flow and I decided to cover the top of the rock face with another building, but I just reused the kiosk building I already had in order to make it blend a little bit better and to give those guests a little bit of a view from the top down as well into the area that the titanosaurs will be roaming. Something that I knew I wanted to place into this area from the very beginning was a viewing deck, or multiple of them. I started off by making a half circle to then place against the lower half of the Titanosaur exhibit, and then I wanted to place one on the top of the Titanosaur exhibit as well. Something that I think is really important to remember about when you're building with realism is to make sure that there is some sort of structure or pillar holding up the part of the platform or building that is not on the ground. Here is an example of that where I'm building two posts that are sticking out of the side of the mountain and from the bottom of the other platform. I also had to add these little metal pieces to make sure they were actually looking attached rather than just there. I think it looks nice, even though it isn't all too much. Of course, the guest needs a way to get to that one platform that's hanging off the edge of the cliff. So I decided to make a switchback staircase that would fit onto the platform, reaching from both the top to the bottom of it, allowing the guests to quote unquote go up and down, even though they really actually can't. Something I would absolutely love as a placeable item, kind of like the pterosaur perches, is like a little piece that the people can stand on, or they just stand and do their idle animations, allowing to have these buildings actually, or structures actually look like they're being used rather than just existing for almost no reason. Another thing that happens here is this fits so perfectly, and I'm so happy about it until I realized how tiny the staircase is, and then I completely resize it because I felt it was going to be way too small otherwise, and I'm just not going to be happy with a really small staircase. Of course, safety matters, and that is something I had to tackle by putting a fence around the entire Titanosaur exhibit, or at least the parts the guests would walk around. This took forever, but I am so happy with the way it turned out that I'm not really that upset with the time that it took. Once I had all the railings in place, I wanted to connect the platform to those railings, so I had to adjust a fair amount to make sure everything lined up the way I wanted it to. But once I had that platform in place and I added the little border that goes between it and the actual path, I was very, very happy with the end result. After I had all of this said and done, I went around the edge of the enclosure and placed a bunch of foliage to cover up the grassy gap between the stone and the path. Lastly, I kind of just go around the edge of the entire area, filling in those gaps that need to be filled with rocks and foliage, as well as just adding little key details that matter the most to a build like this. To fill in this little area at the top of the upper viewing area, I decided to use the Titanosaur statue as a fountain. I've constantly used this little raptor fountain piece to just spray a little bit of water out of something or somewhere to give it a little bit of life in that area. One thing I do not like about this Titanosaur statue is the tail is so long and they made it stick up, which can be an issue for something like this. So I had to get a little creative and hide the tail of the Titanosaur statue in a tree, which I wasn't really expecting to do, but you know what? It looks okay. Another thing that I really enjoyed doing was placing these little informational boards around the park for the guests to read. I had almost forgotten to make the park sign, so I had to do that as well at the very end of this build. I like how the sign turned out in the end. It is basic, it's just some bones and some text, but I think it gets the name across quite well. Now that we're coming to the end of this speed build, I wanted to say thank you for watching if you made it this far. I'm really excited for the next episode where we get to expand upon and dive into more of this park. Now I will leave you guys with the cinematic and I hope you all enjoy.